Haute cuisine! Bonjour, mes amis. Voila, here's your food. Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 108. Today we'll talk about how culture affects cuisine. There's the arts, there's architecture, there's our attire, there's all sorts of words that start with A that would be representative of what is our culture. It is also the things we eat, the stuff we put in our mouth. And you wouldn't believe how much culture affects all that. Stay tuned.
Hello from Two Chaps Towers. Yes, this is Two Chaps, Brett and Christian, coming to you today on this, what day is it?
It's December 2nd. I hope you're hungry. We're going to talk about food.
We're talk about food. This is the show, not just about food, but is the show of the business of culture and the culture of business. If you like what you hear, feel free to leave a comment and subscribe to our YouTube channels. I can't wait. I'm a little hungry today.
It's lunchtime here. So yes, and whatever he said about the liking and the subscribing, I mean, you get the drill, right? And if you're watching this for the first time, welcome everybody. We've been waiting for you for 108 episodes. Glad you made it here. I'm sure it's the cuisine thing that lured you in, the talking about food, probably. No, we're not going to cook. I'm not Emeril, and this is not Paul Bocuse, even though he looks like him. But we're going to talk about food regardless, and how our food intake, how our food consumption is affected by the environment in which we live. Any thoughts on that, Brett?
Plenty. I've bridged the culture coming from what I would consider a pretty European influenced, originally when I was growing up anyway, influenced set of cuisine. Meat and potatoes, but still with that kind of small serving type of good quality type of approach and seasonal approach to food. Came here to America, and of course things are much more abundant, bigger servings, cheaper, so you can get anything at any time of the year. There's it's a big country, so therefore you have a big a big food basket to draw from. And then, of course, experiencing Europe a little bit more, and that memory still lives with me of the first time I put pan con tomate in my mouth in Spain, right? With that taste that just explodes in your mouth. I mean, it was just an amazing experience, and those experiences live with you. So it kind of leads us as culture people to explore why.
Have you ever noticed that if you enjoy something abroad and you maybe in a holiday, vacation, festive, relaxed mindset, then when you maybe take that item with you back home and then you can wait to consume that at home and maybe share it with your friends and family who were not on that trip with you, and then this item is kind of a letdown? Has that happened to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've not done it. I've given up doing it. I just live in the moment. It was just, this is an experience that I probably will not be able to explain to somebody. I won't be able to recreate it. So I'm at a hiding to nothing trying to do it. I just need to let it live in me and the people I'm with at that particular time. I mean, same thing happened with steak in Firenze steak, in Italy. That taste, I can't explain it to people. You just cannot do it. So am I going to troll this whole country for a piece of steak and keep cooking and spend thousands of dollars trying to recreate it? No, I've tried.
Nah.
It's not going to work.
Yeah, but, I mean, I was young and inexperienced and maybe hopeful as well. So on our honeymoon, we found this wine in southern Italy. So my wife and I honeymooned in south of Naples, Florida. Not Florida, south Naples, Italy, Napoli. I'm sorry. Uh, and we went up to the mountains in this little town called Ravello, and they had a magnificent wine there. Very simple, basic country type red. And I said, "Yeah, this is awesome. Let's grab a whole box. Let's put 12 bottles in the trunk. We'll take this home with us." Man, did that disappoint at home. It tasted awesome while we were there. It was not such a great experience at home. So I've been guilty of that, and I
Yeah.
learned my lessons. However, I did notice that some of these food ingredients, the items that we choose to cook with, the fruit, vegetables, meats, or whatever it is we use to create our meals, that they do taste different when we go into different areas of the world. And I've made this experience similar to you with the US and Europe, or with Australia and Europe. Um, and the challenge has been that North American food production is quite different from European food production, at least in my experience, because it evolved differently, right? So the impact is, how does culture influence our cooking, our cuisine? And we don't only have to focus on Europe and North America. I mean, you go to parts of Asia where it's potato heavy starch, and then other parts of Asia where it's rice is the main uh, carbohydrate contribution, and a lot of it depends on geography, on topography, on the climate, what grows there, how does it taste, so the soil composition, the how much rain comes down, all of this affects how stuff tastes, right? I get all this. However, if you compare apples to apples or tomatoes to tomatoes, then I found it interesting, right? So you have this ancient grape that grows in Italy, and they make a wine from it. It's called Primitivo. And in California, they grow the exact same grape, but it's not called Primitivo. They call it Zinfandel. A a red Zinfandel, or a classic Zinfandel, a deep red wine, and a Primitivo from Italy do not taste the same. That is because weather, temperature, soil, whatnot. I'm not a vintner. I'm not a wine expert. I like to make sure that there's no leftover wine. That's my job, but I don't create the wine. Um, but then you look at like apples, tomatoes, potatoes, how a cultured plant, right, that humans have bred and developed by intentful breeding, I guess, and what the cross
Yeah.
pollinating,
Hybrid breeding. Yeah. Yeah.
how our ingredients change because we have different expectations of the purpose they should serve, right?
Mm.
In many cultures with a long tradition of cuisine, and when I mean long, I mean hundreds of years, there is a focus on quality and specificity. In territories that are bigger, and maybe the cultures that are younger, EI North America, um, food didn't always serve the purpose of high quality and celebration of a meal. It served the quality of, hey, we need to get people fed, and we're a growing country, and we're a country from coast to coast with huge distances. And by the way, we are really great with technology and inventing refrigeration and trucks and food chains and whatnot. So we have the ability to bring food out of season to any corner of this country, and maybe it won't taste the same as it did back in the old country, um, but we still get something on the table that looks and feels and somewhat tastes like the stuff our ancestors had. And I think there's a different approach to how you look at food and cooking, right?
Yeah, and it also, if you take it to the next level, about what does that do about waste? What does it do about how much you use of the? So what you're referring to there is kind of high risk cultures where they're willing to kind of
Yeah.
experiment and try anything, and go over the next hill and dale with whatever they've got, and make the best with it. And then of course you've got the older cultures that are a little bit more kind of, back in Poland, of course, everything and anything is put in jars. If it's not used, and it's preserved, and it's used for later. Even the cuisine that you're served there is influenced by by the historical fact that there was a time where there wasn't an abundance.
Right.
So you never knew where the next meal was coming from. So it was combined with things that either had the effect of preserving another item. So it's a science. It is a science. Food is a science in and of itself, but it also is an experiential approach to what do you then do with the food in terms of how the culture sees itself in terms of relationships, building relationships, hosting people, and showing people that you're open and you're more supportive and interdependent, right?
Right.
The ability that you're sharing resources. Why we talk about, even in the Midwest here in the US, a slightly different approach to food than some of the coastal areas, because it is to its very heart an agrarian society. So there is it expresses itself even in business in terms of a little bit more interdependence, because obviously farmers are not there to compete with each other to a large degree. They're selling the same product to the same customers, and a lot of times there's the openness for sharing resources and best practices and things like that. So I mean, it's multifaceted. So.
There's also some theories around which crops you're growing, whether the crops you grow as a farmer you can do somewhat independently, or as your farm, as the owner of your land, and maybe it's you and your family, or maybe you hire a couple of people, but you might be able to do it by yourself. So there are some crops that lend themselves to a more individualistic business approach, and there's other crops, especially rice, that you cannot grow as an independent farmer. You need to have other farmers to work with in order to build those terraces and build drainage and have water supply and irrigation and whatnot. And again, I'm not a farming expert, but the way you farm depends on the crops you want to grow, and that in turn will shape the behavior around the crops. How do we interact with each other? There's a book that I've been recommending on this program before, called 1491, about the history of the Americas before the European contact. And as the scientist who wrote the book spends at least a chapter or two, I forgot how many, but he talks a lot, or writes a lot, about how the indigenous people of the Americas grew food, and they farmed completely different than Europeans. Europeans farm monoculturally. So there's one field for potatoes, one field for wheat, and one field for, I don't know, cabbage. And most Native American cultures farmed multiculturally. So they planted different plants on the same plot, knowing that the insect that will pollinate one plant would be the basically the enemy of the pest that would befall the other plant right next to it. So there's this bee, and the bee would eat the lice that would not go on that one plant, but on the other plant. So by having a more holistic approach to plant growth, natives didn't need pesticides, they didn't need fungicides, they didn't need herbicides. They could grow it more, some would say, more in tune with nature. But that kind of farming doesn't lend itself to mass production, right? So this works if you're closely knit with a well-defined footprint, and you are okay with the footprint you occupy, with your spot on the globe, with the resources you pull from it. Now, fast forward a couple hundred years, and you have Europeans who come over this land like a tsunami and bring with it a completely different way of food production and a different way of seeing land ownership and perceiving property. Totally turned this world upside down, and we know what the result was. Native population was decimated and marginalized to this very day, and their way of growing food and preparing food largely went to the wayside, right?
Yeah. Although now you see it being rediscovered in the last 10, 20 years of research that is all of a sudden having this epiphany that you can actually use this cross, what you're describing there, with using insects and actually leveraging the resources that are in the soil and in the wild world already. And this is a highly scientific approach, and of course,
Right.
it's been around for thousands of years. People knew this already, right? So you would think that, sometimes it it teaches you that sometimes you've got to stop and look about what you've got around you, right? And just what can you learn in the space? Right? What can you learn if you just take some time to stop and look around you or in the culture that you're in? And it is no more evident than in food culture, for sure. Yeah.
Right. And I think the fact that we have, as humans, have perfected our technology in order to allow us to overcome natural restrictions, so overcoming seasonal growth or availability of certain food items. So I think it's human nature. It's quite understandable that once we were able to do that, we said, oh yeah, sure, strawberries all year for December, Christmas, cold, well, at least Northern Hemisphere, cold weather. Yeah, strawberry cake for Christmas. Awesome. Love it. I want it. But it has a downside to it, right? So we're sacrificing the uniqueness of the product. And as you said earlier, there is a high risk culture that is okay with this. Let's give that a try. And then there are less indulgent and more traditionalist or lower risk cultures who say, well, I'm not sure if that's good for me, if that's good for my land or for the community by and large. So I would rather not risk something new and stick with what we used to have, right? So that affects how we go about these plans or shopping consumer behavior. I want to acknowledge some of the people that are on today. So Catherine King says, yay, applause. I love that. Thank you, Catherine. And yes, we like conversation. We're glad that you're joining our conversation today. Thanks for watching. And then, here's a little peek for tomorrow. Tiramisu in Rome, the best. So this is Brent from Toronto. I will challenge you on that. I've had awesome tiramisu outside of Rome, and one of the best tiramisus I had here in the United States, prepared by a lady from Rome. So maybe we come full circle. This is Brent, and Brent will be joining us. Maybe you'll see. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for joining in.
Yeah. No, I think it also think about celebration. You know, the food, when you look at older cultures or more historically aged cultures, and that whatever term you want to use for it, a lot of these foods kind of bring about a sense of celebration. A certain food means celebration. I know that it does here in the US. I mean, if you think about Thanksgiving turkey and things like that, there are specific things like that. But I find that this is just a personal thing with me, that having seasonal food meant that as soon as you saw that food, that was as impactful as listening to Christmas music over the radio, which tends to kind of imbibe our lives somewhere about the middle of October nowadays, you know. But it seemed to bring on this sense. It's like, oh, I'm eating this, so now this is the impending season that brings on this particular celebration. Whether it may not even be a celebration, maybe just the time of year. It feels like, see, strawberries don't feel like winter to me. You know, they just a good strawberry feels like summer to me. You know, growing up and not being able to find strawberries until it was spring. You know, until it was like in Australia, obviously October, November time, where summer was impending. The weather was getting warmer, and these really wonderful. You know, it's kind of like that. I guess it's been referred to as an Epicurean type of approach, right? If you bring it back to some of those philosophies, the philosophy-based basis of that, it is an Epicurean. Food is a celebration. Food is something that gives us the meaning around the different times of year and the celebrations we spend with family and friends and things like that. So, just personally, I mean, it's not a right or wrong. It just says I kind of miss that here in the US. Yeah. There is a more of a it's a mundane is the wrong way to say it.
Transactional.
So it's quite interesting, but not that I don't like. I mean, there's plenty of good food to be found here in the US. Yes. Many of it, if you have to search for it. I've just discovered from my good learned friend here that I have one of the best German sausage places within walking distance of my house, which I have been remiss in not going and trying out yet. I think I do need some tips on cooking this stuff from what I've heard.
Well, I'll come to your place. I'll help you with that. I'll make sure of that.
Why can't we do it live on a show? I could do it. You can tell me behind doing it.
Well, I think maybe it's because food, and the reason why we're talking about this here today is I checked the stats on my blog, which I do infrequently, but I went back and say, hey, which blog posts have been doing well over the year? And there's one post that is more than 4 years old. I'm gonna post a link here in the comments, which basically begot this episode here, and this blog post is like 4 or 5 years old, and it is consistently ranking high for whatever reason. I don't know what people. I mean, I could find out, but I didn't care to do it yet. People Google something and they find this blog post, and apparently they found it valuable. I'm happy people read it and they still find it relevant. I think it is. But I think food is such a full sensory experience, right? So we experience food not only ideally with other people and as a cultural experience, but we have all our five senses to consume it. We see it, as Brett just said, it puts him in a maybe in a festive spirit or some kind of mood. So there's the visual. You can hear the food being cooked, or maybe you can hear people chew it, or maybe you can hear a break or a slurp or whatever. There's a sound. It feels like something. You feel a texture in your mouth as you drink or chew, and then you taste and smell. Right, the five senses are involved in it at all times, and that's why it's not a superficial cultural experience. It's one that permeates us, our whole beings, and if we sounded like we were bashing North America for its lack of sophistication around food, then that may be a misperception. I think, as Brett just rightfully said, there is amazing food to be found in the Americas. You may have to look a little bit harder for it because the mass-produced food is what you find anywhere roadside. That is franchised and chained out, and it tastes the same across the country and allows for predictability and reliability. Great. It may not be exquisite, however, it does the job. You will also find food, if you look in the right corners, that is magnificent and that will compare to anything else around the world. I think the life in North America can, for outsiders, can often feel like it is bland and over commercialized. And while that may be the case, and while you may have that visceral reaction as a European or a South American or maybe even African Asian going into a North American grocery store or supermarket and being just bombarded with the variety of offers, then yes, I would not fight your argument. You're on to something. There's also this very niche, very specific, very local, and very unique type of cuisine that can be found across the continent. And if you're willing to explore it, I would say do that. And one of my favorite guides to do that, because I'm not a culinary expert, but I know one. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us because he chose to take his own life. But if you haven't watched it yet, go ahead and watch anything you can find on the streaming services by Anthony Bourdain. Famous chef, and then turned into a TV journalist. I would say almost a philosopher. He's in my book, he's a cross-cultural hero because he's been throughout his life, he was willing to explore culture through food, through cuisine. He wanted to understand a culture through the people and their food. And beautiful approach, love it dearly. And if you want to explore other foods without traveling to all these exotic places yourself, start with watching some of his episodes. I'm sure, Brett, you've seen some of them too.
No, pretty much all of it. I mean, the basis of his philosophy, as you call it, and I thought he was a great philosopher. You can learn a lot about life by watching his observations of human nature through the sensory perception of food. But what does he say? He says, "I don't want to eat in the restaurant where the cook cooks. I want to eat where the cook eats." Right?
Yes.
That is classic. That is taking the cook out and say, where does this person, where does she go to eat? Where is the best expression that they like to imbibe? And I think that's a perfect analogy, a metaphor for exploring cultures. really digging deeper and getting what is the origin, what is the source, the heart of this culture. It's a fascinating journey. Yeah.
And I would take it one level deeper. If you're in a new place and you don't know what to eat or where to start, don't ask the rich people. Don't ask the people with means. Find out where the working class people go to eat.
Yeah.
And let that be your starting point. You can still, if you're a person of means, you can still elevate the game to as much as you want to spend on it. Start with the frugal experiments, because that's typically where the gold mines are.
Absolutely. Well, that's it. What else can
I'm hungry now. What are we going to eat?
It's lunchtime. I got to go and eat.
Let's grab some food, people.
Thank you, everybody.
I could talk about food all day.
Absolutely.
I could talk about it all day.
Absolutely.
At one point, I will have to plug in a restaurant in the mountains of northern Italy. I'm not going to talk about this now. I'm just going to open a loop for you. There's a restaurant in the mountains of northern Italy that can teach us about food and appreciation of culture. But maybe on a future episode. Stay tuned.
I got one of those too. Maybe we should get those people. Oh, we get that the one near just south of Florence that we went to was basically a house with a tent next to it.
You don't give it away just yet.
I'm not going to give it away. I'm going to give it away. We should, So we should. That's the people we should be speaking to. Absolutely, too. On top of all the wonderful other guests we have. By the way, we're going to have a guest tomorrow.
Stay tuned.
Dropped a hint. All right, guys. See you later. Bye.
See you tomorrow.